Hello and welcome to the World Wanders podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by italki.com. For those of you who haven't heard of italki before, it's a fun, fast, and effective way to learn a language.
Yeah, it's actually a language learning platform, so learners and teachers from all over the world sign up and then link up to learn languages. You can find someone that's within your price range, who specializes in the things you want to learn, or even speaks the local dialect you want to learn. If you're learning Spanish, you can find someone from Argentina if you're going to Buenos Aires. See, I learned that on italki.
If you want to get started today, we've got a special promo going on, and it's promos.com.
It's promos.italki.com/The
World Wanders. And you get your second lesson free after you sign up for your first. So get started today. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by you, the fans and the listeners of the show. If you would like to support the show, go to www.patreon.com/The World Wanders. And for just a small amount, you can support the show, and a little goes a long way. Thanks in advance for your support.
Thank you. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the World Wanders podcast. Today on the show, we are very excited to bring you, once again, Rory Madigan.
Yeah, and Rory is the guest who's been on the podcast the most frequently. This is episode number 4 that he's been in. And you might be like, 4 episodes with the same person? Like, why would you do that? Rory is that badass that he kind of needs 4 episodes and probably even more than that. Rory came out to Banff when we recorded this episode, so Banff, Alberta. And it's the second time that he's been out to Alberta to visit us. And prior to that, we had also connected with him in Australia and then, of course, in Greece, where we first met him back in 2011. So we've been friends with Rory for 5 years now, which is super, super cool. And it's been really, really neat to watch him grow as a person and as a traveler. And he was celebrating his 1.5 years on the road. And it was really neat to talk to him after traveling for 1.5 years and just see how things have changed since episode 2 that I recorded with him. Not episode 2 in terms of the entire podcast, just episode 2 with Rory, was when he first started out his trip 1.5 years ago in San Miguel in Mexico. And so it's just really neat to experience the way that he's changed up close and in person and to talk about that.
Yeah, so we sat down with Rory at a little park in Banff right by the river, put our portable recorder down on a picnic table, and had an awesome conversation. Hope you guys enjoy.
All right, we've got a really awesome guest here. And it's somebody who's been on the podcast before, and one of the friends that we've kept in touch with the most since our very first backpacking trip. And that friend is Rory Madigan. And this is super exciting because he's actually with us in Banff. So welcome, Rory.
Thank you.
We're super excited to have you here. We've had such a great couple of days, like exploring Banff, playing tourists with Rory, and now we're sitting down to talk more about travel, which is basically what we've done for the last 48 hours anyways, but
yeah,
this is more official.
Yeah, and this is actually the 4th time you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
So if you look into the show notes, there'll be links to the other 3 episodes, and you can follow Rory's journey from Australia, like around the world and around the world again.
Yeah, and it's super exciting because the day before yesterday, is that right?
Yeah.
Day before yesterday was Rory's 1.5 years on the road, so 18 months since he left Wagga Wagga in Australia, and he hasn't been back since.
No.
And so the last time I touched base with Rory, he was in London, and he was getting ready to go on a pretty crazy part of his trip, going to India, which is something you never expected to do.
No, like, not at all.
Yeah, I remember talking to you and just being like, wow, like, your travels have expanded so much, because I even remember talking to you when you were planning your first trip to North America when we saw you the last time, and you were saying, like, I want to do North America before I do South America in case I, like, get stolen and, like, die a little, which is totally legit. But it's so cool, like, talking to you now and just hearing, like, how much things have changed for you. And so, did you want to tell us a little bit about India?
Yeah, so I guess India was one of those destinations that was really low on my priority list when it came to like my travel bucket list. And I think the more you talk to people when you're traveling, the more they kind of plant ideas in your head, and you kind of just, I don't know, you kind of roll with that. And it was actually one of my friends that I was traveling through China with. She had just come from India, was doing her, I think she was doing like her yoga teacher training, and her stories about India were just like so interesting. And it's one of few destinations where people that have been there, when they talk about it, they don't overly sensationalize it the way that they might overly sensationalize other parts of the world. It was just, the stories she was telling me were really honest, and she told me all the bad stuff, she told me all the good stuff, and it just like sparked this interest that I never had previously. And I thought, if I can get through India, if I can do 3 weeks in India, I think I can travel to any country on earth.
Yeah, I've heard that like so many times when people have been to India, and India is still somewhere that Ryan and I want to get to. But I know when I was taking my teacher training, I really wanted to go to India, and the more I looked into it, I was like, I don't know if I'm like ready to do this as like a solo female. And you booked a tour for India, right?
Yeah, so I did a 3 weeks tour with G Adventures, who I've traveled with a lot before and who I've spoken about a lot before on this podcast. And that was a great way to sort of ease into it, I guess, because as far as confronting countries go, I guess India's one of the more challenging countries to sort of navigate.
Yeah, definitely. And what was it like showing up in India, like arriving in an airport in Delhi?
Yeah, in Delhi. It was interesting. I really wanted to push myself, and I really wanted to kind of throw myself into the deep end. So I think most of the other people that were on my tour decided to take taxis from the airport. I decided to take the subway system. And, you know, if you're going to throw yourself in, you might as well throw yourself all the way in. So I got on this subway. It was empty when I got on, and then over the course of about an hour, it just started filling up to the point where there were, you know, like everyone was shoulder to shoulder. There was like very little room to actually stand on the train. But it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. And there was actually like this really nice older couple there who told me which station to get off at. And yeah, so I think sometimes it's good to throw yourself into the deep end of the pool, because it kind of sets you up with what to expect for the rest of your travels.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when we went to Bangkok, we kind of had a similar experience where we like get out of the airport and we're trying to take the bus, can't figure it out, eventually get into a taxi, and then we have to like negotiate the price with the taxi driver, and then we're like get in the car and we're like ask him about seatbelts, and he just like laughs at us and then continues driving. We're like, okay, like we're in for something here.
Yeah.
Where was like the most comparable place to India you'd been before India? Like this, I mean, craziest country, sketchiest place.
I think the sketchiest place I had traveled before India was probably Bolivia.
Okay.
And I think most people who have traveled to Bolivia understand where I'm coming from when I say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can relate to that.
Yeah, I remember going into South America not knowing what to expect, and since we had traveled Southeast Asia, I was like kind of expecting something similar to that. And the only thing that really got into that neighborhood in South America was Bolivia, where you see like animals running across the street, and like the bus stops and there's no washroom, so you just gotta go to the washroom on the side of the road.
And, like everyone's doing it, and you're like, ew, this is why everyone gets sick here.
Yeah. So,
this is why I'm sick. Ugh.
So in India, what were like the highlights and lowlights of that trip?
The highlights. There's a city called Udaipur, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but it was the setting of one of the James Bond films back in the day, and it was just beautiful. And I actually wish I had more time to explore that. I really loved Varanasi as well. It was completely chaotic and definitely not like a place to go for a holiday or a place to, relax. But if you're looking for like a really culturally immersive experience, maybe a little more spiritual, Varanasi is like the holy place of India. A lot of people do pilgrimages there. It's set on the Ganges and stuff. So that was like, just like sensory overload there, but it was absolutely fascinating. The lowlights, I would say, I'm definitely not a fan of Delhi. I think it's just sort of a place to transit in and out of, but there's definitely stuff to see there. I think for me the hardest part of India was just the pace at which I was traveling, because there are quite long distances between a lot of the cities, and yeah, I think to really soak in a country that is that contrasting and has that much stuff going on, you really need like a few days to see and experience what you need to experience, and then just actually have time to reflect on that as well. When you're moving at such a fast pace, it feels very chaotic, and you don't have time to process all the things that you're witnessing for the first time.
Yeah, we were talking to Anne and Brandon from the Yoga Nomads the other week, and they were talking about their trip in India and kind of saying something similar, where it's like, it's definitely not a vacation, and like you need time to just like I don't know, like let it go, like go hide out in your hotel room and like write and like watch movies for like a couple days to just like back off, because like it's not easy when you're just like out and it's so chaotic on the street.
Yeah, I think they said the exact same thing, like just time to process it. Everyone seems to talk about the food though. Is the food as amazing as everyone says?
Yeah. Straight answer is yes. I personally never had bad food when I was there. Like even the cheapest restaurants that we went to, where you were paying the equivalent of like, say, 4 or 5 Canadian or Australian dollars, the food was always good, you know. Sometimes it was amazing, sometimes it was just good, but I never ate anything that I was like, this is a bit subpar. And there's such a variety of different things to eat there as well. Like if you're not a huge fan of spices, there's actually like a lot of different options for you in that regard. If you're a vegetarian, you're going to be in paradise, because there's so many non-meat options over there. Like a very large percentage of their population is meat-free. So yeah, I think it's definitely one of my top foodie destinations.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If you were to go back and do it again, what do you think you'd change or do differently?
I think I would try to slow travel it a bit more. Knowing which destinations I loved, I would like to spend a bit more time in them. Like I would love to go back to Udaipur. I'd like to see a bit more of the south and stuff. As a male, I think I would actually be comfortable enough to do it myself now. I'm not sure what a lot of females would feel about that, because I know there's obviously like challenges that they would face that I wouldn't have to face. But it was confronting, but it wasn't nearly as confronting as I expected it to be. You know, for every in every country, for every bad person there's hundreds of nice people who are willing to help you out, who are willing to explain like the transit system to you and stuff. I think you just really need to be prepared and to know what you're getting yourself into. If you're going to India thinking it's going to be this really majestic spiritual place where everyone's going to be dressed in saris walking down the street, then you're in for a bit of a shock, because that's part of the culture, but that's not the culture. You have to remember that like it's a country, people are working, people are going to jobs. There's certain cities where people are just going to be driving to work and working at like their 9 to 5, and it's not all about throwing paint around on the streets and stuff every single day. Like you have to accept that like in addition to being a tourist destination, it's also a country where people are living their lives on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and there's like the like you can have like either a romantic view of it in your mind, where it's like, yeah, people in saris throwing paint, celebrating, or like maybe not romantic view of it, where it's like crazy and people are getting raped and dying everywhere. But then there's just reality, where it's like kind of similar in a lot of ways to everywhere else, where people are just going about their days, doing their things. There's lots of people, it's crowded, and so like either way going, kind of like you get this like experience of what it actually is like to be there.
Yeah, that just makes me want to go to India even more. And so from India, where did you go next?
I flew from Delhi to Bangkok, and that was my first time actually traveling Southeast Asia, I guess, except for Bali. But as we've spoken about before, Bali is just Australia's Cancun, so yeah. I didn't feel like I'd really been to Southeast Asia before.
Yeah.
So I ended up spending the next 4 months just exploring as much of Southeast Asia as I could, starting with Thailand.
And what did you think of Southeast Asia?
I loved it. And again, like India, it was never very high on my priority list. And now that I've been there, now that I've experienced it, it's somewhere that I could happily go back to again and again, just because there's so many things that I could never tire of there, like the cuisine. The cuisine in Vietnam and Thailand is just like incredible.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's some foods, there's some cuisines that in your mind you're like, I'm going to eat this every day, and then after a week you're sort of done with it and you're back to eating burgers and hot dogs. But the entire time I was in Thailand, I was eating curry and stir fry every day, and I still miss it to this day. Like any opportunity to eat like pho or like any sort of curry, and I'm there.
Yeah, we've talked about so many times too how like Thai food is just, it's so much more expensive in like developed countries, like first world countries, and it's also just not as good for the most part. Like I feel like Thai food's the one we've struggled with the most to get like really good quality and affordable Thai food. It's like not the same outside of Thailand.
Yeah, definitely.
And so traveling for 3 weeks in India and then going to Southeast Asia for a couple months, did you feel like you had any like transitions in that period? Because that's a lot of time in like developing countries.
I think because I did quite a few tours whilst I was in Asia, like I spent 5 months in Asia and I did a handful of tours there. I think that was like a really big transition for me into realizing, okay, like India's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Thailand, and I don't know why I thought I would struggle traveling in Thailand, because Thailand is maybe the easiest country I've ever navigated because it's so well equipped for backpackers.
Yeah.
And realizing that and going to places and realizing, you know what, like it's not nearly as scary as I thought has made me a lot braver as a traveler.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of travelers out there who, when they first start traveling, they're already at that point. It's not confronting or like unusual for them to just like get off a plane in some random city and go do their thing by themselves. But I think there's a lot of people out there who would love to travel, who maybe haven't traveled or who maybe have only traveled in groups because they're a bit apprehensive about that. Mm-hmm. And I was like that for a really long time. Like I have a lot of like anxiety issues. I have a bit of PTSD. So for me, it's been like a huge transition going from the point where like I only felt comfortable traveling with a group to the point where I'm now sort of planning my future travels completely solo.
Yeah, that's like, it's so cool to like be with you again, like in person, and to hear about that transition and how travel has like impacted your life in such a like a powerful and beneficial way.
Yeah, I think that's something we can really relate to, or at least I can. Amanda was like really geared up to go to Southeast Asia in 2011 when we first went, and I was like not really into it that much. But yeah, like you go into Bangkok and you're like, holy crap, what the hell is happening here? And you slowly get a little bit more comfortable with it. And then after 6 weeks, you're like completely at home there. And then it's kind of a similar thing in South America too. Like we had already been to Southeast Asia, so we had that, and we like knew we could feel comfortable in places that from the outside seemed really sketchy. And then you kind of just get like more and more comfortable. Do you feel like is that what you feel it is? Like you go somewhere that you feel uncomfortable in, and then you start to feel comfortable, and then you kind of can transition that across your life and say like, no matter what the situation, like I can handle it. Is that kind of what's happening? Yeah, definitely. You know, like if I hadn't gone to those countries, I probably still would be a bit apprehensive about, say, like going to Colombia by myself or something like that. But once you're in the situation and you see how like your tour guide handles it, and you see that, okay, like if you want to get a bus from Yangon to like Mandalay, it's like it's not nearly as complicated as you kind of thought it was initially. Like it's like you go to the bus station, you find your bus, someone there is bound to speak English. Like even if it's just one person, someone's going to be there to assist you in some way. It's until you have that experience though, you just sort of don't know. It's like skydiving. Until you skydive for the first time, you don't know what it's going to feel like. So it's just kind of like approaching your fears in a kind of safe way, and then sort of going from there, I guess. Like it's kind of like trapezing with a safety net, and then realizing, you know what, like I don't need the safety net. Like yeah.
Fly on my own.
Yeah. So now that you've had kind of like more, I guess you'd call it like maybe travel as adventure instead of like travel as like, I don't know what you'd say, Europe, like something more of like vacation versus like adventure. How has that changed your view of what you want to do in the future? Do you want to like continue to go more in that adventure side where it's like a little bit sketchy, a little bit crazy, or how does that change over time?
I think I definitely have a greater appreciation for developing countries now, and the positive impact that tourism can have for those countries and stuff. I think I was sort of just back in Europe recently, and don't get me wrong, Europe's amazing. Like, Europe is incredible. But the ease of travel there makes everything feel a little too familiar to back home. You know, when you're in a country like Myanmar, you're so far removed from everything you know and everything you understand back home. Like, nothing is the same. And that's what makes it interesting. When you get to, you know, when you get back to London, it's like, London is awesome. London's like a second home to me, but it's like, I don't know, it doesn't make my heart beat faster.
Yeah, like something's missing.
Yeah, it's very comfortable. And, yeah, now when I think about the countries that I'm planning to travel to in the future, I think all of them, by most people's standards, would be considered developing countries. But I think as a backpacker as well, it's knowing that your dollar really stretches so much further outside of the developed world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think that both of us can relate to from our travels is like, so in 2015, so last year we decided to both take solo trips, and Ryan went to like Central Europe and I went to Bali. And obviously Bali's a little bit more like, it's still quite touristy, but it's a lot more developing than Central Europe. And, you know, getting back from our trips and talking to one another, we were talking about how, like, Ryan's like, it was kind of almost too easy to go to Central Europe. Like, you know, it's pretty easy to show up somewhere and find a place and find somebody who speaks English. And
yeah, the train station has all the signs in English, which is like, it's good, but I think that once you kind of have this experience of like kind of adventuring when you're traveling, you kind of like crave that a little bit more when you go somewhere new. You want it to be like slightly challenging, and you want to get these wins where you're like, oh shit, like I crossed the city and bought a bus ticket. Like, that was just such a successful day.
Or like, I took a public bus, or I actually got what I wanted off the menu.
Yeah, I've definitely felt those little achievements. Like, when I got to Bangkok, I think it was the second time I landed in Bangkok, I decided, okay, I'm gonna try to use public transport to get to my hotel, and it was so confusing at the time. I don't know what I did wrong. But I eventually got from the airport, or at least the side of the road adjacent to the airport, to Koh San Road for 23 cents, and I was like, sweet, like, I did it. Like, it took me an hour and 45 minutes, but I just saved myself like $40. That's like $40 worth of curry I can now afford.
Yeah. Yeah, and it feels so much like, I don't know, it's so much more rewarding. Like, we always called it like small wins. Like, I remember in Bangkok when we finally kind of were getting adjusted to like Southeast Asia life after a couple days. We're like, okay, we like crossed the road. Like, we like, you know, we made it alive.
Bus
like,
tickets.
Small win. Took a public bus. Small win.
Yeah, I think it's really good because like, it's so fulfilling to see yourself growing and like getting outside of your comfort zone and like achieving something. But in day-to-day life, it's so easy to be pulled towards comfort, to not do that. But then going somewhere like India or Thailand or South America, a lot of places, you're kind of forced outside of your comfort zone. You don't have this chance to just like hide out and be comfortable. And so you do experience this like fulfilling sense of like growing every day because you're getting slightly more and more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So now that you've been traveling for a year and a half, you've checked off probably quite a few spots on the bucket list.
Yeah, I'm at the point now where, and this is, you know, maybe the epitome of a first world problem. I'm sort of like, I don't know where to go to next. You know, there's still so many places I haven't been to, but then there's so many places that I've really fallen in love with that I want to take some time to re-explore and stuff.
So, like 2 years ago, when you had this dreams of going to all these places, how is it different? Like, when you imagined then, like, okay, once I've been to all these places, I will have X. I'll feel like some sense of contentment, excitement. How is it different in reality than what you imagined it being a couple years ago before you'd been to all these places?
I think before my trip, I always saw an end date and I always saw myself returning to something. And I guess now that I've been on the road for a while, I realize it's not a loop. It's not a circle that I'm trying to like start at one end and rejoin at the other. It's just a straight line. And like, I don't know when I'm going back to Australia. I still don't know when I'm going back to Australia. I don't know if I'm going back to Australia. And that's kind of what I love, is like, it's really opened me up to kind of embracing whatever comes my way. And I don't know, because a lot of people treat travel as like, it's like a bit of a break for them, and that's fine. Like, that's great. I've done that. But then you can treat travel as just a break where you take some time off and you go back to what you were doing before, or you can treat it as a completely new stepping stone that leads you in a completely different and unexpected direction. And I think that's where I am now, is like just kind of very open to whatever comes my way. Like if I end up staying in Canada, or if I end up finding a way to work remotely in Mexico, you know, come what may, like there's nothing that says I have to go back to Australia. There's so many countries in the world in which I could live and work. And I guess I question, like, why do I feel like I have to go back to Australia? Like it's not 100% necessary at this point.
Yeah.
Well, why do you think you feel like you have to go back to Australia? I know you don't, but like, why do you think most people do? Why do you think you did?
I think it's just a societal thing. I think it's the fact that nearly every day I'm asked by someone, like, when are you going home? And, you know, because most people identify with the idea of what a home is. And at this point, like, if we were to be super technical about it, I'm homeless. Like, I don't have a home. Like, I don't have a physical house. You know, my belongings are at my auntie's place. You know, like, I don't have something to go back to. But with everyone always kind of reinforcing this idea, like, when are you going to go home? It's sort of like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't really embrace the idea of a home the way that I used to.
Yeah, but that's definitely an interesting thing to hear about, because I've seen like more and more, I guess, through like maybe like Facebook memes and quotes on Instagram and stuff, where it's kind of like, and I feel like it's been said for years, that kind of like home is like where your heart is, and it's like home is just really wherever you are. Like it's not necessarily this like physical structure that you have all your stuff in, or that, you know, where these people that you grew up with are, or where you were born and raised. It's kind of wherever you feel comfortable, wherever you feel, or just wherever you are, I guess, even. I don't know. It's a lot more complicated than I think society sort of makes it out to be. Would you agree with that, Ray?
Yeah, I think for me it's been, like, as we've transitioned to travel more, living other places, it's really been about people for me. And I feel like the last few times we've moved, like, I feel like I've gotten, like, closer to being home in each of those places, because, like, I connect on, like, a much deeper level with the people that I'm with there. But yeah, I don't know if I'd ever, I don't know, I feel like I still have this like ideal in my mind where like I'll one day like find a group of people who I like really, really connect with and want to be around, and like we can all like live in one area and it'll just be like great. I don't know if that's just like a ridiculous ideal.
I think it's interesting because I like also like, I mean, I think that's what we all strive for, is connection with one another as humans, and connection with like the place around us and the people around us. But it's interesting because the more I travel, I feel like I meet really amazing people that I connect with on a really deep level, but it's like they're all over the world. So ideally they'd be in all one place, but like we were talking about earlier, like you were talking about, you know, like if I did a wedding, I'd almost have to do a wedding tour because my friends are all over the world now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting thing when you become a traveler. Like you travel as a lifestyle, and you meet really cool people from all corners of the world that you might have never met had you not set out on this adventure. But then they're not in this like one place that maybe you call like quote unquote home, or that you settle into.
Yeah, and there's something you hinted at earlier, Rory, about where you could think of travel as like going somewhere, but eventually you'll want to come home. But then I think a lot of people learn while they're traveling that like being on the move, forcing yourself to like continue to move to new cities, like that's really, really valuable. I think that's something we've experienced. Like our biggest life changes for us have been moving to a new city, and then it kind of gets stale after like 5-6 months, sometimes even quicker than that. Do you think that's something that's like more attached to being young, and that as you get older you'll feel like more of a desire to like be stuck in one place? Because that's something we've thought about. Like, does this push to like live in new cities because it's awesome, makes us feel good, does it get counteracted at some point in time?
If I think about it rationally, I think at some point I'm going to want to slow down and just be somewhere for a long period of time. But then, I don't know, there's so many expats that move away or live nomadically, and I don't know, I think there's this idea that we go through things in our life, and we talk about a lot of things being phases. And at some point you realize something that people have been telling you has been a phase for 10 years isn't actually a phase. Like, that's who you are. And I think most of society is sort of built to be geographically monogamous. But I think there's a bunch of people out there, and I think, you know, most of them would be categorized as travelers, who are just meant to be nomadic, who aren't meant to stay in one place all the time. You know, some people really benefit from structure and routine and the comforts of sort of living the same thing over and over again, like going to the same job, having friends and family that are there all the time. And I think other people really benefit from spontaneity and from being somewhere different all the time. And, you know, at some point I may get tired and want to stop for a bit, but I can't imagine myself committing to staying in one place for, say, 20 years. I just, like, at this point in my life, I cannot see that happening.
Yeah, and staying, like, in the same job, and I don't know. I think that's the thing that makes me feel, like, squirmy in my own skin, is when somebody's like, I'm going to work for this company for 20 years, and I'm just like, I get, like, EBGBs out of it. I don't know. Fear of commitment, maybe? I don't know. So when did you go to Sri Lanka?
I went to Sri Lanka at the beginning of May.
Okay, so that was like a pretty recent thing for you. Because that was you had like a pretty big transition into discovering your love of hiking there.
Yeah. So I think if you had spoken to me, and you did speak to me this time last year, I was not a fan of hiking at all. When I went to South America, we traveled to Peru, and obviously every single person in my group either did the Laris Trek or the Inca Trail, and I was the one person in my group that was like, I do not want to do this. I don't think I'm physically capable of it. So I spent a few extra days in Cuzco, and then at some point, like, I just had this awakening. I think it was when I was in China, and I kind of, I guess, accidentally committed to an overnight hike, and through being kind of forced into that, really discovered that not only was I pretty good at it, that I actually really enjoyed it as well. And since then, it's like any opportunity I've had to hike somewhere, I've kind of jumped at that opportunity. And Sri Lanka was, you know, maybe one of the worst hikes I've ever done in my life.
Okay, I mixed those up. It was China.
It was China. Sri Lanka was like one of the most difficult hikes I've done. But we actually also did some really cool hikes when we were there as well.
Yeah.
I just haven't spoken about them to you guys yet.
Yeah, I just hear about like the Death Stair hike. So you were on a tour in China, and how did that sort of all go down that you ended up on a hike when you're like pretty like, nope, I don't hike?
Well, I didn't really read the itinerary, so that was kind of my fault. But you know, when you've been traveling for a while and you've been in each destination for 2 or 3 nights, sometimes you just don't have time to read all the details of your itinerary. So I kind of looked at the destination map, and I was like, sweet, it goes to Beijing, it goes to Xi'an, it goes to Chengdu, and saw that it went to the Tiger Leaping Gorge. Didn't really think about the fact that that might involve a hike. And then I think a few days before we were due to do that, our guide was telling us about what we needed to pack for our overnight hike, and I was sort of just sitting there like completely surprised, like, oh my god, what have I got myself into? And there wasn't really much of an opportunity to get out of that. It was sort of like you just kind of had to do it, like that's what you had signed up for. And one of my friends was like kind enough to like lend me one of her hiking sticks, and what I thought was going to be super challenging, what I thought was going to be me hiking at the back of a pack like hours and hours behind everyone, ended up being the complete opposite of that. Like for me, it was like I just powered up that mountain, got to the top. I don't think I've ever felt so accomplished in my life. And from there, it was just like, man, like I can do this, and I really enjoy doing it. And there's, you know, as a photographer, like what you see when you get to those summits and stuff is just incredible. I was like, I want to get to more summits and take more amazing pictures at these summits and stuff. And yeah, so I've got a few hikes coming up in the next month or so. August is going to be like my big hiking month in the northwest of North America. So yeah, it's interesting to go from something that you were absolutely not interested in to being like kind of fixated on it.
Yeah, it's really cool to like see that change in you, and to see you be like, I mean, to come here and be like, yes, I definitely want to hike. And then like, I mean, we went for a pretty big hike yesterday, and I don't think you like even struggled for a moment. Like you were crushing that hike.
That was a great hike as well.
Yeah. It's neat to see these things that like sometimes you're forced to do, or you're forced to kind of like encounter face on when you travel, that really can open your eyes to the things that you're capable of.
yeah, there's definitely things that I still haven't given an opportunity to. And who knows, maybe some of those things I will end up falling in love with. Like we were speaking about this yesterday, I still haven't taken the plunge, literally, and gone scuba diving. And for all I know, I could end up really loving that. I haven't explored it yet. So
Yeah.
you never know. A year from now, I might be like talking to you about scuba diving.
Next episode is going to be like, I'm a scuba diving instructor. Full on like advanced PADI or something like that. I think that's like one of the beautiful things about traveling, though, is these things that you kind of maybe have attached to your identity, or maybe you've been led to believe based on like something somebody told you were little, or just something that you got in your mind from whatever, can really be like broken down when you're traveling. Like it gives you the opportunity to sort of discover things within yourself that you're like, wow, I actually can do that. And I think that that's a really amazing thing. Like I think maybe even hiking for me was kind of one of those things. I mean, Ryan and I
Yeah,
talk.
I remember like early on, we had like quite a few hikes where we weren't enjoying it as much.
Not very happy about climbing to the top of a mountain. And now I'm like, get me up there. I'm going to do this. I think same as you. It's so rewarding when you get to the top of a mountain and you're like, I just did that. Like my 2 legs took me there. Nobody carried me up there. Nobody drove me up there. No engine got me there. I got myself there, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too because like we live our lives trying to like just do more stuff we want to do and do less stuff we don't want to do. But then sometimes you get forced into doing something you wouldn't do, and then you're like, oh, I actually really enjoy doing this. But yeah, you always forget that like there are things we think we don't like that we actually would like. You just feel so confident in what you like and don't like, and then never put yourself in a position to get forced out of that.
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting realization to have in your late 20s when you think you know yourself, and when you think, you think you have a good understanding of what you do and don't like. And then, at that age to discover something like that, it's like, oh, like there's still so much potential to learn about myself. And I think like I definitely wouldn't have had that experience if I hadn't traveled. I'd just be sitting at home like, hiking is awful, like mountains are awful, exercise is terrible.
Exercise is the worst thing ever.
If you were like, let's say you were sitting down with yourself from 2 years ago, what do you think you would be surprised about?
Everything at this point. I think, a lot of my interests are still the same, but I think the way I present myself and the way I view the world now is a lot different. Before this big trip, I was not a backpacker. I was a traveler, but I was not a backpacker. I traveled with a suitcase. I stayed in like what I now reflect on as overly expensive hotels. I would only ever take luxury transport and that sort of stuff. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, as long as there is somewhere for me to sleep, be it a hammock, be it a mattress on the ground, I'm content with that. I travel in what a lot of people consider to be a very tiny backpack.
I would be one of those people.
It's just a backpack.
I take, local transport in some weird places. Like, I don't know, I think I'm just a lot braver than I used to be. I think I've progressed a lot with my self-identity and just learning to kind of let go a bit of my physical manifestation and sort of learning to care a little bit less about how much weight I've gained or how fashionable I'm being on a day-to-day basis. Like, I used to care a lot about fashion, and I still sort of do, but most days you will find me in trainers and sweatpants and a t-shirt, and it doesn't matter because, any person that I encounter on a day-to-day basis is going to be gone the next day. I don't feel like I need to conform to all these expectations because I'm sort of in one place one day and in another place the next day. I think the very first stop on my trip, Mexico, really it changed everything about my approach to travel, and it just really shifted my perspective on how privileged I am to come from a country like Australia and that sort of thing.
So what were the steps when you were in Mexico that happened?
When I went to Mexico, I did a tour at first for 2 weeks. And then after that, I kind of ventured out on my own, and I hadn't really traveled by myself before. Like, every tour I'd done in America, in New Zealand, in Europe, I'd always been in a group. I had other people to sort of travel with and socialize with and be around. And then in Mexico, it was like, I was by myself in a country where I spoke like 3 words of Spanish.
Tacos?
Or tacos, so 4 words of Spanish. And really, like, it was like, you're here now, like, you're not allowed to, like, book a flight home, like, you need to adapt to this. And, you know, it wasn't nearly that hard, but, yeah, it definitely forced me out of my comfort zone. And I think I hadn't really done that before. Like, traveling to Europe was different for me, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Traveling to Mexico at times could be uncomfortable, not because I felt in danger or anything, but just little things like tap water.
Yeah.
And having to be cautious about, you know, what fruits you're eating off the street and that sort of thing. The fact that you can't brush your teeth in the shower, the fact that you can't flush your toilet paper, it really makes you aware of how easy things are in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. It's like seeing how other people live is so eye-opening sometimes. And it kind of like, it's almost like it's really grounding. Like it's really like eye-opening to see what the world is like. It's a bigger picture, because I think we all kind of grow up in our like sort of like little bubble, and we know what we know until we become like teenagers, adults, and then we form identity. And then if we don't explore, we kind of just continue with that. And if you explore and see the world, then you expand and expand and expand. And I think that travel in any form can give you that. But seeing when people live so differently from you and seeing how they, I feel like for me, seeing how people are happy without like the things that I thought I needed to be happy. Like, it's like, oh, I need like a nice car and a good job and maybe like a house and all these like fancy clothing, the articles, items. Like, I need these things in order to be happy. Like, that's what we need over here. And then I think going to probably like Southeast Asia was like, wow, these people are like smiling and happy and they have like nothing. But it's like they don't have nothing. They just don't have the physical goods that we seem to think that we need in like the first world.
It really makes you reevaluate your priorities. And, you know, one thing that I hear from people all the time, and it, you know, to an extent it kind of bothers me, is like, Rory, you're so lucky you're traveling the world, you're so lucky you have the funds to travel the world. And, you know, I'm very much aware of that. I don't need to be told that at this point. Like, I'm very much aware of that. But even traveling through Asia and stuff, and this may sound really weird to a lot of people, but it's like, even in communities that are really struggling, I see kids and they're surrounded by family, they're surrounded by siblings and their parents and their grandparents. And I look at them and I think, you know, you guys are so lucky because you have family. And, you know, like, I don't really have that. You know, I have extended family, but I don't have that kind of core network anymore. And it's interesting as a person that, you know, a lot of people would consider extremely privileged to look at people that simply have other people around them that care about them and stuff, and to look at them and envy that, you know, because I'm sure they're looking at my life thinking, I wish I had the money that this person has. And I'm sort of looking at them like, I wish I had the love that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can look at somebody else and see something that they have that you don't have and be like, you know, that's kind of all you need. That's a pretty like beautiful realization to have. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Another thing you talked about was it kind of sounded like through travel finding maybe like turning up the volume on what you care about and turning down the volume on what other people care about, like learning to listen to yourself more than what you think other people want to see or hear. Could you talk about like a bit how travel changed that over time? Or?
Yeah, well, I think on a physical level, being so separated from people that have those kind of differing opinions makes it easier to tune it out. Like, when you're on the other side of the world, it's easy to ignore what people are saying.
Yeah.
But also just realizing that, like, we've all kind of been given this blueprint for how to live our lives. It's like, you go to school, and then you graduate, and then you go to university, and ideally you meet someone in university, and then you date for a bit, and then you get married, and then you have children, and then you get a mortgage, and then you grow really old and have grandchildren and die. And it's like, where did this formula come from? Like, surely not everyone is expected to conform to this formula. And I've always kind of known that that wasn't for me. And then traveling, it was like, traveling confirmed for me a lot of my beliefs. It's like, it's like I thought I knew this stuff, but travel really was sort of like, travel spoke to me in a way, and it was like, you know what, like, you're doing the right thing, like, you don't need to be listening to these other voices and stuff.
Is that just like having more time with yourself so you can like actually think these things through, or is it like moments while you're traveling that like make these decisions happen?
I think it's both. I think it's the moments though that really kind of solidify certain things. Like, you know, if you've ever struggled with depression or just feeling kind of complacent in your life, to go overseas and have one of those 10 out of 10 days where you feel high on life, it really is kind of life affirming. Mm-hmm. And it reminds you that there's so much more happiness for you to achieve. And, you know, some people are completely happy sitting on the couch with their boyfriend or girlfriend watching Game of Thrones. And if that makes you really happy, that's great. But, you know, not everyone is like that. Some people crave more. Some people want to have more experiences than that.
Yeah.
And I think we actually, like, well, not, you know, like, as a society, we kind of hold people back. We reinforce this idea that people need to be responsible, and you need to have a house, and you need to have all this stuff. And I think, for me personally, it's like all about the pursuit of happiness, you know.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow's never guaranteed, you know. I could live till 90, or I could live till 60, or I could slip over in the bathroom tomorrow and hit my head, and that could be it for me. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and regret not doing things, you know, because if you run out of money, there's always ways for you to earn more money. You know, there's jobs in the first world, you know, you can, you know, even if I have to scrub toilets, like, I can always make more money.
Yeah.
But by the time you get to the end of your life, it's like you can't buy back those experiences you missed.
Yeah, I've kind of thought of this like you're at like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and like someone's gonna come kick you out at some point, and you're like not entirely sure when that's gonna be. Like, you can probably say it's not gonna be like immediately, so you probably like don't need to like
stuff yourself,
gorge, like, but you need to like get out there and try things, because someone's gonna kick you out, and you can't be certain when it's gonna be.
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot too. Is like, I think probably the biggest thing I like wonder to myself when I think about how we're on this like spinning planet in a universe that nobody really understands how we got here. I'm like, what's the point? Like, why are we all working ourselves to death and getting so stressed out that we have diseases in our bodies when there's like so many beautiful moments that you can live for? And I think that that's one of the things that when, like, you know, I talk to my parents or I talk to my friends who are still in corporate and they're like, I don't really get what you're doing. I'm like, I'm just trying to like live my life. Like, I want to feel alive every single day. And I don't feel alive when I'm like in fluorescent lights, like typing into a spreadsheet. Like, that doesn't make me feel like I'm living. So I think that's, and I don't know if that's just in some people or if it comes from experiencing the world for the first time and realizing that formula you were talking about just doesn't really fit for everyone.
Yeah, and I want to get back to one thing you got hinted on. I think like this is one of the big lessons from travel, and it comes specifically from traveling like quickly. Like, a lot of people disparage quick travel, but I think one of the big life lessons we've learned from doing it is just to not pay attention to what other people think so much. Because if you're in a hostel room, like, your whole life you've been in a high school where you like, there's such a huge incentive to care about what the people think about you, and then your instinct is like, oh, I want these people in this room to think I'm cool. And then as you travel, like month after month, you're like, oh, I meet these people for a day, and then they leave, and then I meet them for 2 days, and they leave, and it's just like, oh, it mattered. Like, it literally does not matter what they think of me, so I just need to stop thinking about it. And like the transience of meeting all these people and like learning that it's just a waste of time to think about what they want you to be, because they're going to be gone. There's going to be new people. I feel like that's one of like the biggest lessons from traveling that we've learned.
Yeah, definitely. It's like your instinct is to like, or like my instinct at least when we first started traveling was like, oh, I want to like make a good impression on this person. Like, that's what I've been taught to do. Like, got to make a good first impression. And then I got to the point where I was like, it doesn't really matter if this person likes me or not. Like, I need to just be who I am, which is kind of an interesting thing. I know we've talked about it off the microphone, but I'm curious if you can tell the audience sort of like what's next for you.
So I'm going to spend the next couple of months exploring the United States a bit more. So this is my 4th trip to USA, but if you've ever been here, you know how enormous this country is. I'm in Canada right now, but you know how enormous the USA is. So yeah, I'm doing what's I think is going to be my last tour for probably quite a while with Trek America through the Northwest National Parks. So hence all the hiking in August. And then there's a few days where I'm not sure what I'm doing just yet. I might go to Texas. I'm going to head back to New Orleans for 3 weeks, which is my favorite city on the planet, and just have some time off, because it's honestly been so long since I've just chilled out, watched TV, felt bored. It's weird to not feel bored with your life ever, because you're doing stuff all the time. And then I'm going to head back to Mexico, where it all began, for a few months, and still in the planning stages, but want to tick off a few more places in Latin America over the coming months.
And then at some point, is there a time period for going back to Australia, or is that still uncertain for you?
It's still uncertain. I don't want to commit to an end date, because I don't know, like in 6 months from now I might decide I want to work abroad or something. So if that happens, it happens. If I end up back in Australia, I end up back in Australia. But yeah, I don't feel nearly as much pressure as I used to book that return flight back home. Yeah,
I think that's been one of the really neat things to talk about with you being here in Canada, because I think like every time we've kind of connected, it's like we've both had end dates to trips. It's like we had an end date when we were in Greece, you had an end date, we had an end date still in Australia when we saw you. You had an end date when you came over to North America the first time, and it's cool to just be like, to hear you now being like, yeah, I might go back at this point, I might go back at this point, I might see if I can get a work visa for Canada. And I love hearing you talk about potentially becoming a tour guide and doing that for yourself for a little bit too.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I've been thinking about for a significant amount of time now, that I'm fairly certain I want to do. I'm not sure where I will do it, but that's, for me to hold on to an idea for over a year, I think it's a pretty good sign that that's something I should do.
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, I know that I feel like I'm kind of the same way as you. Is like I'm really good at planning and organizing, but I'm also very like. I kind of like daydream about all these cool things I can do. So it's like 1 minute I want to go here, the next minute I want to go here, the next minute I want to go to this third place, and it's like who knows what I'll actually do. Maybe you're not quite as much like that as I am.
Oh no, I am. I feel like in the last 7 days I've changed my trip plan from, I don't know, like at first I was going to go to Arches National Park, and now I'm like, maybe I'll go to Austin. And in the last few days, after speaking to my friend here in Banff, I was like, maybe I should go to Panama.
That's one of the things that I've always found with travel is like, and we want to slow travel in the future, and I know I'm going to have to like chill out a little bit because I've got so many places I want to explore, but getting to a hostel and talking to somebody else about what they've done and where they've been, or talking to somebody who's also traveled is like you just add places to your list. And it's just kind of never ending.
Thank you so much for coming to visit us, Rory. It's been awesome.
Thank you for firstly having me in Banff and having me on the podcast again for the 4th time.
Yeah, of course. I have a feeling that this won't be the last time that you're on the podcast. I think there's definitely more episodes to come. Yeah, I think that it's just, I love catching up with you just on Skype, not as a podcast episode, but I also think that it's so cool for the audience to see or to hear how you've grown so much, because I know that, we talk about so much how travel's helped us grow, but I feel like even seeing you again, I can just see so much like growth in you personally. So it's cool for you to share that with our audience who's listened to you so many times before. Is there somewhere that people can find you if they want to check out your travels?
I'm on Instagram. My account is Rory_Madigan, so it's RORY_MADIGAN, and at the moment that's my only really public social media presence, but that's where all my interesting photos are. Yeah, and Rory's a pretty badass photographer, so I definitely check that out. Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this with us. Thank you, guys.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks again to this episode's sponsor, italki.com. If you're interested in learning a language, go to promos.italki.com/theworldwanderers and get your second lesson free.
We really hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. And if you like the podcast and you want to support us in creating more high quality episodes, you can visit www.patreon.com/theworldwanderers. A little goes a long way. And thanks in advance for your support.